Hello world, it's me again, Nick Brooke. I've got another book to show you. Last time it was Life of Moonson Book 1, The Characters. So, amazingly enough, this time it's Life of Moonson Book 2, The Freeform. Now, these books are pretty much the same size. There's about 4 more pages in the top book, but you wouldn't know it to look inside. What's different is that whilst the characters was everyone's character sheets for the game, so we mailed these out weeks before the game ideally, and everyone was reading through. There's several pages of background material about who their character was and what they wanted to achieve in the game. They had no idea how they could do any of it. What's in book 2 is the rules to the game. So it's quite an interesting structure actually. It came up with while I was putting this together. It begins with the general game rules that everyone got handed with their character packs. This is how you play the game, this is how challenges work, this is how jobs work, this is the basic courtesy that you all engage in when you're playing a freeform game. And then from there it moves on, and structured around the game timetable, it takes you through the various events that happened in Reaching Moon Megacorp's Life of Moonson. And this was publicly acknowledged. Everyone knew at the start of the game what was going to happen 1 hour in, 2 hour in, 3 hour in, until we pull the rug out from everybody. And thereafter, it drops you the strange rules that nobody had knew about at the start, which help you sort out the cataclysmic, apocalyptic stuff that's going on in the course of Reaching Moon Megacorp's Life of Moonson. So we'll take a look inside. I'm going to try to avoid spoilers, because nobody wants spoilers, but I think I can at this point safely tell you the title of our freeform was a joke. David Hall's original suggestion for the title was that we call it The Death of Moonson, and we all pointed out, David, if we call the freeform that, it won't be much of a surprise when it happens. So we thought we'd go with irony and reflection and the special relationship balance between life and death of the Lunar Way. We call our game Life of Moonson, and it's all about the death and possibly reincarnation of the Red Emperor of the Lunar Empire. So let's have a look. First things first, this one will set you back $20 as a PDF or $50 in print. The print cost is the same as for this book, which is about $30. So what we're doing is we're charging less for this because it completes a set, and frankly, it's a little bit more mechanical than the other book. The characters book has some of our finest writing in it. This has a lot of pages of people's ability cards. So you get stuff like that, where the thing on the left-hand page, Artificer's abilities are the things he can do in-game. But there's page after page of these. Everyone's got a page or so of what they can do. And sometimes their job gives them some abilities, but not many abilities, but some. So the ones on the right there, I think, are the abilities that you get as the Marshal of the Blue Army, the head of the Lunar Empire's assassins. The ones on the left are the ones that the guy who's currently in that job can do. So, table of contents, it says we begin at the beginning, game rules, and then we run through the timeline, so everything's got an hour next to it. This was as we first ran the game, and then you get to the end of that, and then half the book is the cards and offices. So everyone who was playing in the game had a role, they had a job, they had a title, and that title meant that there were things they were trying to achieve in the game. But if they lost that job and it was passed to somebody else, we had rules for that to happen, you'd hand your office over to the next person to get the office, and they would have inherited some of your abilities and some of your goals. And we were very careful when we drew this up, because it was a reaction against something bad that can happen in freeforms. So let's say we have a complicated freeform setup where Lord Capulet's right-hand man, who's the head of his bodyguard, isn't particularly trustworthy. What happens in play, if you've got somebody who's playing to win rather than playing to enjoy the story we wrote, is that in the first few minutes of the game, Lord Capulet turns to his bodyguard and says, "Bodyguard, you're sacked. My son is now my chief bodyguard." And if the game isn't designed to support that, that can really screw people over. So what we did was we built into Life of Moonson the investigation rules and the hierarchy of the Lunar Empire. So if you want somebody to lose their job, you have to get to their boss and say, "Boss, can you sack this person?" If you are the boss, yes, you can sack that person, but prima facie, if you sacked somebody who was doing a job, that was probably a mistake. and you are eligible to be investigated by the appropriate investigative organs. We had 3 of them in the game. They were the Emperor's Spoken Word, that specialised in policing the political and bureaucratic roles, the governors of the empire. We had the Blue Army, that was military intelligence, that looked for anything dodgy going on inside the workings of the Lunar Armed Forces. And we had the Cult of Danfive Charon, the moral police, the Black Army, which for purposes of this game, we said were a kind of inquisition, making sure that the priesthoods were behaving themselves and that nobody was going doolally in the ranks of the lunar cults and the examiners. So if you sacked your subordinate, somebody out there had a game goal that said find somebody who's sacking their subordinate and nail them to the wall. That was one thing we did. Second thing we did was we very carefully delineated what are the abilities you've got because of who you are and what are the abilities you've got because of the job you've got. So let's imagine you sack your bodyguard. Well, the guy you put in there doesn't suddenly get a handful of you're a really effective bodyguard cards because that was the guy you sacked. The guy you put in there might get very few or no useful bodyguarding abilities because that's not what he's ever done. So you have this very careful setup that is designed to keep people in the roles where we wanted them to be so that all the terrible stuff that's going to happen to them down the pipeline in the game can happen. That's all part of what goes into writing a freeform, just so you know. There were some other things as well. The combat system in this game, really there isn't one. There was a challenge system where you argued with people in order to get your way about something or other. And in the course of challenges, you might end up revealing secrets or revealing objectives you had in the game. And you'd be forced to reveal these things, or you could choose to do them to get an extra chance of winning. What you couldn't do was just go and randomly beat people up. We said, you know, you're operating in the capital of the Lunar Empire in very secure locations with loads of guards around. You can't just walk up to somebody and kill him unless we've given you an ability that specifically says you can walk up to somebody and kill him. And we handed out very few of those abilities. We handed people who didn't actually have reasons to walk up to people and kill them, or we time limited them so that, for example, in the aftermath of a successful coup, roughly maybe half an hour before the end of the game, whoever takes over as the imperial proxy can condemn people who they think deserve to go to hell. But generally speaking, we were trying to react against something else we'd seen in Freeforms, which was people getting killed off early on because there's a combat system in the game and you can just go and stab somebody you don't like, and then they're sitting around and don't have anything to do. There are ways around that. You can have replacement characters. One particularly clever way I've seen is that the replacement characters are also members of police forces or investigative forces, so that somebody will join the game who's got a motive to find the person who's going around murdering people like your previous character and stop them. But that's slightly crude, and in the hands of somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, it could end up as a big mess. So we actually preferred our solution, which was to say, yeah, you can disgrace people, you can debate them, you can reveal all their secrets in public, you can trounce them in the court of public opinion, and then at the end of the game, maybe you get to kill them, rather than that you're constantly attacking people all the time. And I've seen freeforms that didn't get that right, or that sort of thought, well, surely at any point in the game anyone should be allowed to kill anybody else because, yeah, my freedom. It really doesn't work that way. You have to bear in mind when you're writing these games, you've got 50 or more people playing in it, and each of them is the hero. Each of them's got reasons for doing what they're doing. Each of them deserves, if you like, a happy ending where they can achieve their goals, they can achieve their objectives, and they can go away feeling great about themselves. And there aren't any extras in the sense that there's somebody who paid as much money as you did to join in the game, but you know, if you choose to kill them off 10 minutes in, we'll say, tough luck, should have made your saving throw, go and sit down. Doesn't happen that way. So bearing that kind of thing in mind explains some of the decisions we took in writing Life of Moonson the way we did. What else is in here? The thing I'm fondest of, I'll show it to you because I'm actually very, very happy with this, was something that we sprung just after the middle of the game. So there's a possibly peaceful transfer of power to the next Mask of Moonson. Everyone's gone away, they've had their supper, they come back, and on the referee's desk, we've got a great big map of Glower, and it's divided into zones. And nobody's seen anything like this before. We've suddenly brought this out, and we're starting to fiddle around with counters, and there's counters for lots of military units. And what we're doing is we're just gradually raising the temperature, not in a frog boiling way, whatever the reverse of a frog boiling way is. We're trying to provoke people into thinking, hang on a second, I'm the commander of the Imperial Bodyguard, I've got a crack regiment here. These people who've been screwing me around all day, I can do something about that now. And we had one confrontation absolutely engineered into the game. There was a routine, entirely ceremonial changing of the guard that we had built into the structure of the game. And just after the sad death of the Red Emperor, there was going to be a changing of the guard when security forces who are devoted to the Chief Cenobite, the Grand Master or Sochan of the Black Army, were meant to stand down and hand over to Imperial Bodyguard regiments devoted to one of the people who is likely to be in the running to be the next Moonson. And we just thought, well, let's just wind that one up and see what happens. Push everything out there, get these things on the table. So the combat system was, the idea was basically inspired by Junta. The combat system borrowed a lot from diplomacy, because along the classic freeforming lines that you don't ever want anyone to be in a position where they can achieve all their goals just by themselves, where they, by sitting in a corner and playing a little game of cards with themselves, they can say, oh, look, I won the freeform. You never want that. What you want is to have people out there building alliances and sharing stuff, and you scratch my back if I scratch yours, and you wanted to have a situation where people were having to build a faction or a coalition in order to achieve stuff, because that's the way lots of people achieve stuff simultaneously, and you have to explain or lie about what you're doing. And that's all grist to the mill. That's what makes freeforms fun. So the Coup Game is something I'm very fond of. It worked a bit like Junta crossed with diplomacy, as I'm saying. Choosing a new emperor, I'm fond of. There was a gradually escalating hierarchy of things you had to do in order to prove that you were worthy to manifest the next Mask of Moonson. And it begins by just saying, well, we've already said that there's 3 different kind of jobs in the game. There's the governmental ones, the military ones, and the religious ones. Well, obviously, in this, you've got a supporter from each of those. You can hardly represent the empire. So the first hurdle people had was they had to go around and maybe talk to people they wouldn't have talked to otherwise and recruit somebody else for their faction. And then the next hurdle we gave them was to say, well, oh, yeah, here's an angle you haven't thought about yet, because actually, you should probably make sure that you've got an ally and somebody who's actually a ruling person in the empire, and a woman, somebody female, please. And unless you can get somebody who isn't lunar, somebody who's currently running the empire, and somebody who's a woman representing the female side of the lunar empire, which sadly our game wasn't 50-50 men and women, ideally it would have been, doesn't happen, then what are you doing? You're not fit to be the bearer of the next Master Moonson. So you're having to escalate and find more people and bring them into your coalition and build your faction larger. And as you're doing this, we're also saying, if you trust these people enough that they are going to back you to become emperor, you're going to have to share all of your objectives with them. So you share all your religious objectives with your religious backer, all your political objectives with your political backer, all your career objectives with, I can't remember exactly how it went, something like that. And then the third hurdle we staged was that you had to have one of the members of your faction had to volunteer to be sacrificed to chaos, entropy, and the Howling Void. And hey, the game had a happy ending every time. Somebody always stood up and took that plunge. It was always interesting seeing how players would interpret that and how they would explain themselves, what it was that they would do in order to be the Red Emperor, the next Red Emperor. So that's a lot of what was going on. You'll also find all of the workings of the taxation, the economy, the planned economy, the quotas, the tax audits, all of that stuff's in here. There's all the sealed envelopes. Several players begin the game with a sealed envelope and something very cryptic written on the outside of it. And presumably they look at this at the beginning and think, you what? How's that ever going to happen? And believe me, they all happen. We are quite good at writing these things. So if you give somebody a goal that says, go up to this character and present a severed head to him, they're likely to do it. So you can give somebody a sealed envelope that says, if you're ever presented with a bloody severed head, yeah, do that thing. And yeah, these are all things that are time bombs. They're original envelopes. They were handed out to players at the beginning of the game, and our players are a good crowd, so we would trust them to crack the envelope at the appropriate time, only after the right trigger, and say, oh, crikey, that's what's happened. Now there's a fundamental change in the way my character sees the world, and I'm going to have to start acting differently. Maybe I've been illuminated. Maybe I've gone insane. There are people walking around whose goals are to get people illuminated, get people insane, convert people into the heresy of the White Moon movement, or whatever it may be. All great fun. Some people had repressed memories, and there were things that could unlock them in the course of the game. And well, one of those memories being unlocked, you get a whole new character sheet. You discover that actually you're Fazzo Widered, which is rather nice because he's very competent. Another safe pair of hands. I enjoyed defeating him in the duel at Dangerfield, but that was a long time ago. So anyway, this is the kind of thing you're getting if you pick up Reaching Moon Megacorp's Life of Moonson, Book 2, the Freeform. It's a lovely complement to Book 1. And I want to be very clear about this. We didn't publish this because we thought maybe 24 years after we first ran our Freeform, 24 years after people started talking about it, almost 20 years after we published all of the character sheets for the first time online, and now that every secret in the game is laid bare for everyone to run. Our intention in doing that was not to say, why don't you run this game for your 50 best friends? We really wanted to share the amount of work that goes into creating one of these humongous live-action role-playing games. If at the start, I've chatted about this with our co-authors, if somebody had said at the beginning, you know what, guys, the thing you're writing is going to end up 500 pages long. It'll sit as a huge, great chunk of your bookshelf. It's gigantic. It's a massive undertaking. If we'd known when we started working on this back in 1994 just how huge it was going to turn out, and this isn't unusually big for a freeform, I should stress, this is actually just a 50-player freeform. If we'd done an 80-player freeform, it could easily have been half again as large. If we'd had a sense of the scale of what we were getting into, maybe we would have seen sense and not done it. But hey, it was the 90s. We were in our 20s, didn't yet have kids, maybe weren't yet settled down. We had a lot of time to just get on and write this stuff and collaborate, share what we were working on, improve it, gradually get to a point where we could take this thing and run it. And what they don't tell you, if you're not actually involved in running a freeform, is that the directors are the last people who find out what's going on. So the game runs itself. The players are out interacting. It's not a script, but they've got their guidelines. There's people they want to meet. There's people they have to meet. There's things they're going to do. There's people who want to meet them. All those interactions are happening in the game space, whether it's a big hall with desks in various corners or several rooms, or it's really nice when you can run these things outdoors and have everyone ambling around in the sunlight in their daft costumes. That's particularly scenic, but with English weather, sometimes doesn't happen over here. And from time to time, a director will find out, oh yeah, so-and-so's just had a fight with so-and-so, or so-and-so's broken up with so-and-so. And it's like, oh, that's interesting, great, this is really intriguing stuff. And we'll gather in the best of the news, the stuff that deserves to be made public, and we tell people about it at the hourly news bulletins, which is something you always schedule in these things, is every hour on the hour, you get everyone together and you pass on any news of big breaking world events. And sometimes there isn't any, which might be news in itself. The thing I wanted to mention here is that one of the things we always did for this game was we ended the news with a weather forecast. So one of the players in Life of Moonson is Ulrika, the weather girl, who controls the weather in Glamour. There she is. If I remember rightly, her boyfriend is Bruce Wayne, but that's by the by. Anyhow, she's turning up every hour on the hour, and her briefing is to tell everyone that the weather's going to be great. It's going to be lovely, another perfect day in Glamour. And then, late in the game, we go up to her before she gives the weather forecast, and we say, sorry, the weather forecast's in, and it's apocalyptic snow hurricanes, and we're all going to die. And that's a fun one. We're also seeding useful bits of news into the announcements, like if we know the economic game is running off the rails and everyone is not going to get the money that they are owed and IOUs are worthless, we will make sure that the news tells people that the economy is going swimmingly, everyone's overachieving their quotas, and there is absolutely no need to rush and withdraw all your savings from the central bank. Because if you give people happy news like that, they're bound not to act on it. So anyway, it's all part of the magic of freeform running. And then after the game's over, it's been running for maybe 8-9 hours, probably longer if you count the time people take getting into their costumes and setting stuff up. We all head to the bar to decompress afterwards and listen to people telling their stories of what happened, what they achieved, and we gradually drift off into this happy space where we can forget all about the horrors of writing and running these things until the next time. But that's over to you, really, isn't it? Thanks for listening.